So welcome to the man, the legend, one of the world's most acclaimed screenwriter, Mr. T Davies. Thank you very, very much. Merci du fond du cœur for doing this. It's such a treat to have you on the festival, and particularly because I'm in awe of your work, generally, but especially last year, years and years was, I was so impressed.
In France, actually, we went up to Cannes to premiere the series, and I've never had applause like it. It was shown in the cinema, and I've never had applause like it in my life. It was so lovely to be in France and to see it being celebrated like that. So merci beaucoup.
And it's quite funny right now because we are all part of the Lion family in a way. It feels really much like living in your series. So how does it feel to you?
It's strange, isn't it? Well, because I did years and years out, and I did a series called Doctor Who as well. So I've written the future quite a lot of times, but I never imagined a future in which we'd all just be sitting at home. It's real life, much cleverer and much stranger than fiction. I would never have dramatized this. I find it fascinating, and it is strange to think if years and years been transmitted just 1 year later, I'd be burned as a witch. It's all happening. But what strange days we live in, and I wish I could be there. I wish here we are doing online interviews, and it's just not the same, is it, as doing a proper session where we could see people's faces. But thank you, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for that introduction, which was lovely.
But years and years for me, I think the brilliancy of it was that it was really much about the now. It was really much about, as you said, a metaphor for right now. And I felt so actually jealous and envious that you walked. You walked in that wild prairie first.
That's a great image. That's what I try to do. Not always, but I try to write in places and go to places where no one's ever been before, and or where you haven't got any rivals. I could write a cop show. I could write a detective show. I love those shows. I wish I could write them. I'd probably be very rich, but I'd rather go and write stuff that is off the beaten track, or the stuff that other people isn't doing. Part of Years and Years was me thinking there's such a distance, there's such a disconnect between real life and drama. And why is that? Surely drama is about real life, and it's drama. I mean, theatre can turn around quite quickly, but television and film is very slow. You have a script, it takes a year to write it, takes a year to make it, sometimes it takes a year to show it. So 3 years can have passed. Movies, 5, 6, 7 years can have passed, 10 years can have passed. So there's just a gap between it and the world, and I wanted to close that gap because I think we should all be sitting up, and television drama should make us go, well, that's now, as you say. Although Years and Years was set in the future, it was a metaphor for now, right now. And I seem to have chosen a good time. The world's mad. Sorry. Yeah.
No, but I mean, you did it, and thank you for that, because you also opened the trail. Because before that, I think execs or people in the business, it was very difficult to tackle with honesty, the challenges of the future, how to put it in fiction, etc. And now when I'm in a meeting, I can quote Years and Years, and you've done it. One of the great aspects of it was also the fact that you had that very clever, smart way of creating an antagonist, Vivian Rook, that wasn't the real villain, and that the finesse of the series was that the real villain is our own carelessness, our own indifference to what's going on. And I was wondering if the current period is providing you with new ideas for showing that genre, or have you said what you wanted, all that you wanted to say with Years and Years?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think every single writer in theatre or television or film is sitting at home saying, how do we deal with this? And I haven't heard any good answers yet. There's been some lockdown drama, which are very inventive. I don't know what it's like on French television. We've had quite a raft of lockdown dramas being shot on Zoom, on video cameras like this, which are all right. There's a very funny one by David Tennant and Michael Sheen called Staged. And it's interesting. I talked to David about that because it's much better than all the others, but they're just playing themselves. And David said his wife, Georgia Tennant, has a theory that lockdown dramas don't work when people are acting to camera. If I was being Romeo or Heathcliff or whatever, or Juliet to camera, then it doesn't work. If you're playing a movie yourself, then actually it starts to work. That's interesting. So people are finding ways to make this work. Nonetheless, I can't wait to watch a drama with 1,000 extras and horses and cars and stuff, kissing, and surely I'm not going to go away. I mean, the whole industry is frozen at the moment. Everyone keeps talking about how to shoot, and of course, as you know, this is kind of an industry talk that the greatest problem isn't the distancing, the problem isn't the isolation, it isn't the virus, it's insurance. The entire industry hamstrung by insurance. You cannot get insured. But once in my life, I would say I agree with the insurers. I wouldn't insure productions under this atmosphere. So very, very strange days. And I wish I had an answer. I wish I knew. I mean, it won't stop. I think theatre is in greater danger than television or film. We have awfully vast reserve money, and theatres are literally empty and closing down now. And that's a huge problem. But interesting. I'm hesitant to go out with any theories as to what's going to happen, because I think it's my job to watch. Part of my job is always watching what's going on and thinking about it. So fascinating. Strange days.
But I don't know if talking about that with a fellow writer's friend, but I think my friends are divided into two teams. The teams that are really freezed by the situation and they can't project imagination in the future, and the team that cannot stop writing, they already have a pile effect on their desk. And I'm maybe more team one, which I feel a bit guilty about. And how to write a scene in this future.
It's strange as a writer, because writers are always stuck at home, and I think we like being slightly different, and we're quite aware of being slightly different and almost pretentious about being slightly different. And now everyone's stuck at home, and it robbed us. That's why I see one slightly. It's like, oh, this isn't right. This doesn't feel right. But also, it's genuine. Writing a drama, and I'm actually not writing at the moment. I'm very lucky. I'm in between projects, and I plan to be in between projects. So this suits me down to the ground, weirdly. But if I was, and I will be writing something for next year, if you were to write to a son talking to his mother, how would you do it? Would they be apart? Can they hug? And by the time you've written it, as I said, drama is so slow to get to the screen. By the time you've written it, by the time it's in production, the rules will have changed. Properly difficult to work out how to do these things. Interesting.
So the future is so uncertain that we are going to go back to the beginning of your career and talk a little about your, how you achieved that fine mastery of your craft. I mean, how you grew into the writer you became, and you eventually became. So you started out writing children's fiction, and then, or in the meantime, soap operas. And did you have a mentor? Did you have somebody that you...
I suppose I did. I worked at Granada Television, which was a powerhouse of drama, and also a powerhouse of popular drama. Granada wasn't just about 9 o'clock film dramas. It made soap operas, it made afternoon soap operas, it made children's dramas, and I did have what you would call there's a very fine writer called Paul Abbott, who invented State of Play, and a wonderful man, who very much looked after me. I was not much younger than him, but I was walking. He was much more experienced than me, and he did take great care of me. A woman called Kay Mellor, she looked after me as well. A man called Tony Wood. You need those. Patrons is the wrong word, but they were colleagues, really. But my God, I was so lucky. It was the 90s, and they would literally, it was a department called the entertainment department, and they would literally say, there's no programs going out at 10:40 at night. The news finishes 10:40. There's a gap there. Let's invent a soap opera. Let's put a gap. They filled the gap like that. It was in a way that doesn't happen anymore. They were very inventive, and there was a lot more money to spend. Well, it's not there's more money, but they were more free with the money. They could invent now. The big money goes into big shows. They have cash to spare on training us, really. I was trained in soap operas. So I was one of my favorite jobs was a storyliner on soap operas. So that's not the writer, that's the person who decides, breaks down the story into individual episodes. And I love that job. If I hadn't had things myself to write, I would still be there now doing that job. And soap opera, I mean, there's all sorts of faults for soap opera. I love soap opera, and I'm aware of its problems. But the one thing it teaches you is never to run out of story. Never, never, never. It's just you've got to keep going. Someone has a huge, great big story. They get divorced. They're a drug addict. All that comes to a halt. Then they've got to walk in on Monday morning and think of another story for them, a better story. And I have carried that through my entire training ever since. That you can't give up. You can't be short of story. You can't say I can't think of anything. You've got to give it. It was great training. That wonderful.
And it's funny because I've often heard you talk in interviews about, the demon of procrastination, and you're one of the most prolific writers out there.
That gets said to me a lot. I don't think I am. I think I'm one of the noisier writers out there. It's like, for some strange reason. And I don't plan this. When I come up with a show, there seems to be a lot of bells and whistles. I think partly it's because I'm quite good at doing interviews. A lot of writers aren't. And neither should they. It's not their job, but I can do it. So I tend to get shoved up front. So I end up talking. Here I am. Yap, yap, yap. So I almost think it looks like I'm doing more than I do. I tend to have one show a year, one show every 18 months. However, I can't complain. I have a very, very nice career. And the only show I ever stayed on for a long time was Doctor Who. Because actually, Doctor Who is different every week, and we made it different every year. So I kept making it different. But I like to move on. I think I've got a head full of I'm 57 now, and you begin to realise I'll never write or draw or do everything I want to do. That old age will get, and that's quite exciting in a way. It's like, get on with it. So yeah.
and working as storyliner was really like the key to that foundation in your writing life. It was really like the ultimate school for that. And you're also of the generation of Sally Wainwright, Paul Abbott, yes. Sally Wainwright.
Same teams on the same set. Sally, Paul, what a team. It was just amazing. It was a lovely, lovely day. Yeah, Sally's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
And did you, it's always, because of course I read The Writer's Tale, so, and you mentioned that, it's difficult for writers to talk about writing. It's not something that we do, apart from those occasions. But did you, at the time with Sally or with Paul, did you exchange on, your...
I remember one night sitting in the bar at Granada with Sally, with Kay Mellor and Paul Abbott, who were like two pillars of the British television industry. And they sat there talking about fonts, the font on the software. Not even the software, but that's what they were going about. And I sat there going, "Are we talking about fonts? How can't we have? I thought you two would be having such creative discussions." But actually, that is. I think actually, in the end, the true creative discussion goes on in your head. Maybe you like writing as a team or as a partner, but actually, I think the main joy writers get out of other writers is just like a hug. Like there's someone else who has trouble with the font, trouble with the software, and I do. So just what I loved about the soap operas as well was just sitting around a table of 20 people, all different. You kind of realize there's no such thing as a writer. You don't have to be born here. You don't have to be that sort of person. You don't have to be a man. You don't have to be what these things. You don't have to be this color. It's really, really democratic and open to everyone. And at the same time, all the people around the table did have something in common. They were all mad. It was not so much talking about the art. It was just the practicality of that was the joy about those Granadians, realizing what a practical job. That's what's very good about working in soap operas. I can still break down a script into its budget, into its component parts, into its locations, whether that's a set build, how much that takes to light. And, I know soap operas are different to dramas, but they're actually just the essence of drama. They're a cheap, simple, static version of drama, and that's the template in a way. So an awful lot to learn from it. I would always recommend to any writer, if you hate soaps, don't go and work on them, because don't work on something you hate. But if you have any interest in it, you learn such a lot. And more importantly, you meet people. And the people you meet around those tables move on. And around that table was Sally Wainwright, was Paul Abbott, was Kay. And wow, look at them now. Amazing people. Amazing.
Anyone reads your biography, you worked incredibly hard. I mean, it's like, I'm tired even reading, everything that you did. Like, it's like, wow. And but I think that training allowed you to grow organically into a producer and a showrunner. It was like a very step-by-step training. Am I right? It things that you didn't have to take power. It's like you were the best person to talk to on set when you finally had to go. Is it a true statement, or?
That's very nice. That's, and I hadn't seen it that way before. It might be. Yes, actually, that is what happened. And of course, I'm of an age. This was the 90s and then the 2000s when we didn't have showrunners, and or the term was just filtering across from America. Really, actually, soap operas had always been run by a room full of people, but those policies, the notion of the writer becoming a producer and becoming a co-producer or executive producer, certainly in Britain, didn't exist. It was coming into existence in the 90s and then in the 2000s. So I was very lucky. I was kind of, it wasn't, I didn't have to demand this stuff because it started to be given. But some people do demand it, and some people were demanding it and making it easier for the rest of us. And I know very much that when the BBC approached me to do Doctor Who, that's the first proper time the word showrunner was used. I mean, the word showrunner never appears on screen. It's always executive producer. So, you know, it's still a strangely forbidden term. But that was actually an approach to say, come and bring back Doctor Who. We'll do 13 episodes and you will be the showrunner, which was lovely, which is one of the things that made it immensely attractive. So you're right. It's kind of, it's fallen on me. Maybe that's slightly disingenuous because there are times when I have sat there and demanded things, because as a writer, I think you have to. I think all writers have to make sure they're not excluded from production. They have so much to offer production. They are the production. You know, we were the first person there, so we're not the first person out. So there's been the odd little, not fights, I haven't had a fight for it, but there are certain times you have to assert yourself. But you have to learn that anyway as a writer. You have to assert yourself on behalf of your scripts, on behalf of your ideas. You have to be ready to fight. And dig your heels in sometimes, not always. Don't become a pain in the ass. But yeah, so good timing on my behalf, really. That system was coming into being just as my career was doing that.
And how did you, I know Doctor Who had been your lifelong passion. When you were finally offered, you know, to go and show on that show, how did you deal with the American system? Were there any period of adaptation to the bigness of it, to the sheer?
To be honest, I never really, I didn't really run an American system on Doctor Who. Actually, the truth of it is, I went and lived in America for a few years and watched everyone working out there. What we think of as the American room isn't always the case, and shows are run however a showrunner wants to run it. House, for example, is a massively successful show. Everyone loved House for those 6-7 years it was on. That didn't run from a writer's room. I've forgotten the name of the man who made it, David something, great man. But he, they say he just wasn't the sort of person to write a room, so he would talk to individual writers. He'd go and see them, he'd call them in, and he'd talk through every episode one by one. And that was a hugely successful show. So the system is much more flexible than people think. It's just run in the way that the showrunner wants to. So I didn't do that on Doctor Who. Doctor Who is done like that now, actually. Now Chris Chibnall's in charge of it, the Broadchurch man. He does that. He has a room full of writers. I just did all the, it was only 13 episodes as opposed to 20, but I did all the long-term arcs and thinking, and then brought in individual writers and had one-to-one meetings with them, which I still prefer. I'd much rather do that anyway. I have done the room when we took Torchwood to America. Never did ran a proper room. It's interesting. There might be some of my weaker scripts. It's interesting that I don't think the room suited me in particular. And I say that as someone who grew up in soap opera rooms, but I think I've reached a stage now where I just like to go and do my own thing. That just proves there's no rules, nothing's fixed. Do whatever you can, whenever you can.
I was very interested in how, because I've read that you're not really much into synopsis or breakdowns, and you just kind of really think the script through in your head for a long time. And how, with that process, do you manage a team of writers, even if you're not in a room? How do you interact with them to, you know, bring them along that thought process on a show so complex as Who?
In truth, Doctor Who isn't complex. In my time, the serial strand was very slight. It might be 2 lines per episode. And what I love about Doctor Who, the reason why I stayed on it for so long, is that every episode is different. One week you're meeting Dickens, then you're in the 31st century, then you're at the end of the world, then you meet Agatha Christie. So actually, they're very individual episodes, and that's the work you do with the writer. I might then feed in little lines that doesn't make sense to the writer, but I know will pay off in 12 episodes time. But I did that with a very light hand. I didn't do very, very strong continuity. I didn't do great big. I don't think it worked that way. And our viewing figures seemed to bear that out. They were wonderful, and stories would pay off. I think you'd have great big finales. But yeah, who knows what works? But it worked for me.
Coming back to your years of training, you know, the portrait of the artist as a young man, I always found it very interesting that you had, if I'm correct, and if I'm not, correct me, you had your own dark night of the soul, you know, just before creating Queer as Folk. And did you now look back and think of that moment as a crisis you needed to tell yourself, oh, this is what I want to do. This is my identity as a writer. I want to write about gay men, and I want to be known for that.
Right, yes, I take what you mean. No, I mean, I did have that one bad night. I think everyone does in their 20s, don't they? Really, in some shape or form. I'm not claiming copyright on that. And I think it's a bit dramatic to put it down to that one night. It was something that was growing in me anyway. It was when I worked on those soap operas, what I always did was put a gay character in, which makes me sound very militant and makes me sound very right on and very dedicated to the cause, which I am. But it was entirely natural to me, and thank God I was working in a company that was always very accepting of that stuff. That's always been the case. I've never come across a commissioner who has had doubts about including gay characters or trans characters or whatever. Maybe those commissioners that don't let me in the room, but I don't think so. It's a very liberal industry. It's a very forward-thinking industry. It embraces change. If there's one thing people want, it's a new script by a new writer. It's very exciting. So that was growing in me anyway. If you look at all those, the great sort of, thank you for sort of looking at me as a young writer and charting development. And most of those scripts are locked in an archive at Granada. They're not available to anyone. If you looked at those 10 years, kind of 1990 to 2000, it's a string of soap operas of me writing children's programs. Say about 1991, I was already writing children's programs that have certain characters in it, were coded. I mean, you can look at one woman and say, she's a lesbian. That's a lesbian character. She doesn't say so. A few years later, she would. I think that's me talking code. The code that writers have used for 100 years, 1,000 years. And then moving on, I came to the soap operas. So then I invented like a lesbian vicar and a gay schoolboy coming out, a bride in a marriage in which the groom was bisexual and having an affair with his best man, all this kind of stuff. There's a great big body of work. It simply sits on a shelf in Granada somewhere. I'm not saying it's a lost works, but it's quite dramatic. But actually, if you studied that, there you'd see the development of my work.
Yeah, it's not queer thought was not born out of thin air. It's like the culmination of a long process.
Yes, that's exactly it. And I actually worked on a drama called The Grand. I created a drama called The Grand, which is like Downton Abbey. Downton Abbey was very much like that. And that was interesting because it really wasn't working. I invented it, but it was kind of foisted on my shoulders at the same time. It wasn't exactly the kind of thing I would have invented if I'd left to my own devices. Anyway, I was on a show that wasn't working. Every week the ratings went down. It was terrible. And we all knew it. And so towards the end, I just went, oh, to hell with it. And I just went and wrote what I wanted to write. And I made one of the characters gay in 1920, a working class man, played by a wonderful actor called Paul Warriner. And literally the standard of my writing went like that. I was writing soap opera, then suddenly I wasn't writing soap opera. I'm not denigrating soap opera there, but it's different standards and different scripts rather. And so suddenly I wrote well, and that episode was markedly better than anything else I'd ever written because I'd written from my heart. And that was seen by Channel 4, and that led directly. That's what led to Queer as Folk. Not my life as such. They have no idea what I was doing. Just my work. Your work breeds work in the end. And that piece of work literally said, "That's very good. That's gay. You're gay. You should be writing gay. Come and write gay for us. Queer as Folk."
But it wasn't clear for you before that. It was not that obvious.
Weirdly, no. Isn't that interesting? I would love if I was inventing my life story. I would say I was dying to write Queer as Folk, and the establishment wouldn't allow it, and it took me 20 years to get it on screen. But back then, in the 90s and in the 80s and the 70s, when I was watching television, there were no gay dramas, so I didn't think in terms of gay dramas. I didn't think, I could do a gay drama because it didn't exist. It took someone else to say it. Once they said it, it was like, all the doors were open, and it's been my life ever since. Actually, that's the truth, and would have been somehow. It's nonetheless, that is what I was always heading towards. But and you look at Queer as Folk, the original British Queer as Folk, is set in Manchester on a street called Canal Street, which is still there, which is the gay area, which is full of the gay quarter, which is full of gay bars. And you look at it, you look at the life and the colour and the steam and the heat and the boys and the girls and the kisses and the midnight and the taxis and the fights and the romance of that place. And it is astonishing that no one had put that on screen before me. It's so dramatic as a setting. And never mind the setting, you're looking at lives back then in 1999 of people who are, I used to stand in the discos on Canal Street and watch people, watch them dancing and crazy on a Friday at 2 in the morning. And you'd watch them thinking, you know, that he works in a bank. He works in a bank and he probably lives with his mother and he's not out to her and he behaves all week and then he comes out and he goes crazy. I mean, that's drama. Isn't that drama? There's so much drama in that. It's amazing. I hadn't seen the drama and that no one else had. That's what I'm always immensely grateful about, is that no one else had looked at Canal Street saying, let's make a drama there. I was very, very lucky. And again, it's timing for portraying these things or putting them on screen. I'm literally fitted the right time, the right era. Thank you. Hooray.
It was like a treasure, like you stumble upon. And the difficult part was to see it. You know, it's like and maybe it was going to sound pretentious and French, but it's like Proust, you know, he spent 20 years, you know, going to parties and suddenly that's my body of work, what I'm going to write. You know, it's kind of the same process. And to be an onlooker, to be in and out, you know, when I hear you talk about Canal Street, you're very much in the position of the observer, of the loner, that's taking it all in, and then like a sponge. And I find it fascinating that's what we are, writers. We are rarely, and maybe I'm speaking about me, in life. It's a curse, you know, of the.
It's a joy as well, though. It's a curse and it's a joy. And I know exactly what you mean. 10 years before Carnage Street, when I went out clubbing on Canal Street, I used to like going out on my own, and I used to get really fed up if I bumped into someone I knew, because I loved standing at the railing of a dance floor and watching all those people dancing and imagining their lives. I loved it. I got a genuine love out of it. And I think, you know, sometimes I think this is pretentious, and sometimes I wonder if this is true, but I can, you look back and you think, is that what I was doing as a schoolboy? When you're 14 in school, and in my day, when you're gay, you just keep quiet. You don't do anything. So you're not getting a girlfriend. And everyone's going to parties and drinking cider and getting pissed and having sex for the first time. So I was kind of watching all that as opposed to joining in with it. And because you couldn't, certainly back then, and certainly I think for most kids now at 14, you still can't say, hello, I'm gay, let me join in. So I wonder if weirdly that closet made me a writer in the end. Or made me fascinated in this subject. It's interesting, isn't it? What came first? Who knows? But yeah, I like that. I like that story. I like that version. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you spoke of the Grand. Actually, I had a question of that. It's a bit of a lesser known show, but it's also, I think, a milestone. I read about that. You know, when I think of years and years, what was particularly brilliant and really successful was the mixing of your mastery of the soap and of the family drama and the likability of your characters versus, and the mix with those high, you know, very oppressive, you know, all the social issues, all the really almost philosophical question, and it all clicked, you know, it all really blended together. And in the Grand, I read that the first season was very, very bleak and maybe not light enough. And it's interesting that you had a kind of experience before years and years of how to blend those two elements, so to make it a whole, something that people can relate and really engage into, and not be just doom and gloom and, you know, like, I want to kill myself.
Absolutely. I mean, if I have it's not a style, if I have a trademark, or if I have an approach, it's to see things happening and see extraordinary things happening from the ordinary man's point of view, from the street level. For example, if the West, I could never have written the West Wing. Gee, I mean, who could? It's so brilliant. But if I can guarantee you, if I had written the West Wing, the story would have taken place amongst the secretaries and the staff and the woman running the tea trolley and in the canteen. It would have been them observing the machinations of power while the president strides past. I'm just not the sort of writer who says the president walks into the room. And that is the great genius of the West Wing, that a writer did have Martin Sheen walk in through the door saying, "I am the Lord thy God," like that. I mean, amazing. But it's what I've always done. In the Grand, it was the heart of that show was downstairs amongst the staff. Doctor Who, it's, you know, in coming to write a Time Lord, my greatest invention probably was Rose Tyler, the ordinary woman from an ordinary council estate with a funny mum, who living the most ordinary life as a shop assistant on planet Earth, and realizing that her life isn't ordinary at all. And yeah, and years is ordinary Manchester family, as we all are, but just pawns of huge events happening around us, and yet realizing that we're not pawns, that actually we're the ones with the vote, we're the ones who make this happen, we're the ones who like our nice comfy evenings with the tea and the kettle and everything, and the curtains closed, and being comfortable at the expense of the greater picture sometimes. So yeah, it's an approach that works for me. I make it sound like a deliberate approach, like I plan it that way. That's just my instinctive path into a story, is to do that. Maybe I should turn that. Maybe I should do something else. Maybe I should start writing The President Walks Through the Door, just to see where I end up. So I mustn't get. I think, you know, there's a great. All writers talk about finding their voice. Have a voice in your career. You try to find your voice. I do think writers get stuck in their voice as well, and they can start to. I don't know if the word shtick means much to you. They develop their own shtick. It's kind of their own cliche, their own patter, and I think you need to be aware of that too. So. Right, you can watch out for that in 2022. Il Presidente. I'll write that.
It's interesting. Do you have, I mean, because you have such a career and a track record, and you came up with so many stories. You know, it's like a well that never, you know, dry. And do you have somebody that you that you ask to read your stuff? Do you have a first pair of eyes to collaborate with you, or are you your own critic and your own?
Yes, I am. I'm unusual in that sense. I don't even show my agent. I mean, whoever's paying for the script, they get the first draft. I do work on the first draft a lot, and every writer is different. Everyone has a different theory. I'm very wary of there's kind of a theory abroad these days of what some people call draft zero, which is just a draft that means we just finish it, just put everything in it, just slam every idea down, and then hand that in. And then you start to work on it. That makes my skin crawl, that idea. But by the time you get a script off me, it is, I mean, Nicola Schindler, my producer, always says this. She says it's like receiving a fifth draft of someone else. It doesn't mean I'm clever. It just means I've done a lot of work. And I've thought about it an awful lot. And I give myself notes all the time. And I'm very punishing with it. I mean, you always have the best notes on your own work. You know it better than anyone else. And my own jokes make me laugh, and I cry at the sad bits, but I know what the bad bits are as well, and I work at them and work at them and work at them. And then I hand in a script, and then there are still notes. I'm not saying I hand in perfect scripts. I tried to, though. That's the point, actually. That's the point. I try to hand in a script that's perfect and it's transmittable tomorrow. Maybe then the work starts for real. Maybe then it all gets chucked out, although, to be honest, that doesn't happen. But everyone's different. It's like you are allowed to hand in a rough first draft zero if you want, if you're that sort of writer. I've got to be honest, the strong writers don't do that. I think all strong writers that I know hand in a draft that's ready in their mind.
But there is an horrible name for that draft zero you're talking about. It's called the vomit draft.
Good name.
Which is quite an apt way of naming it. But you must be you must be an expert at also what's, I think, when you get to that stage in your career, it must mean that you're kind of an expert in shutting down your inner critic at the right time. Are you like kind of a Zen master of that? Do you know? Because it's always in our.
I see what you mean. I mean, it's also a job, and you have to move on with the script. In theory, you could keep rewriting the script forever. And I literally improve scenes that I've written 10 years ago. I could be sitting here at this desk and go, "Oh, she should have said that." Oh, that does happen. Things still tick them, but I just find that amusing. There's nothing you can do, you can't go back. So they don't ever quite stop in your head. But professionally, you have to simply move on. If there's episode 3, you need to get on and move episode 4. So there's that too. And also it's time to hand it over. It's like you're in a collaborative medium. It's time for the casting director to sit there and do their magic, and the director to spin pictures out of it, and for Nicola's notes. And, you know, that's the point, actually. It's not, otherwise, if you just wanted your words to be carved on a page, you'd be a poet. I think that's the ultimate solipsistic industry, is where every word might take a day. But I'm not that. I'm a team player.
And I wanted to talk now about your gay dramas, and you're right if I call them that. It's like a rich series of it's like 50 Shades of Gay. It's like all the richness of this experience, you know, throughout the ages. It's really interesting, and also it's so universal, because it doesn't work for the community per se. It works for everyone, you know. And when I saw Cucumber, I could so relate to Henry and his friends. You know, it's a kind of a bit of, there's a bit of magic in that, because it's really like the most universal work I've ever come across. You know, it touches a very deep art string, and I think one of the common thread, is the sheer raw honesty of your portrait of these characters, of these gay men. And, you know, from Stuart in Queer as Folk, and he's cruel, he's arrogant, but we love him for that, exactly, to Bob in Bob and Rose, you know, who has to be honest with these feelings for a woman, to Henry, you know, dear Henry, who's such a mess of contradiction. And you're never afraid to go where the real drama is, you know, where it hurts, where it's really tough. And I think it's very brave of you. And I was wondering, were you like born this way? Is it something you're working on? Because it's very, very brave. And you even faced criticism from your own community, you know, in offering those men like that. And I was wondering, how do you deal with those critics?
That's an enormous compliment. Thank you very much. And I love talking about this, and I love calling them gay dramas. I have no problem being called a gay writer. I love it. I'm immensely proud of it. And do you know, it's funny, I was thinking the other day, it's like I started with The Grand, so I did gay men in the 1920s in The Grand, and then I did A Very English Scandal, that kind of covers 50s, 60s, 70s. My next series is Boys in the 80s. Queer as Folk comes along in the 90s, and then Cucumber in 2015 in the teens, and years took gay men forward to like 2030. I've covered a whole century. I'm delighted. I didn't do that on purpose, but I was like, wow, that's not bad. I kind of need to fill in the 40s and the 50s slightly. I hope I'm immensely proud of that as a body of work, truly, and truly. And I think I don't think it's particularly gay. The only way I could write is to be honest, actually. I think that's why my Doctor Who worked, because I think it really worked because of the moments where we concentrated on what it honestly felt like to travel in time and space. In a lot of those shows, they travel in time, step out and go, wow, the air smells clean in the past, and then they go off and have an adventure. And actually, I genuinely took moments to really work out what it really felt like and the real impact of really doing something so extraordinary. So that's the path that I follow. So when it comes to gayness, you find yourself in some uncomfortable areas, because I'm not going to just sit there and go, hooray, they're gay, it's brilliant. It's like all dramas are about the problems, and all dramas are about the conflict. So that's where I go. And as we were saying earlier, those open fields, those open prairies where no one's written before. So, you know, for example, something like Cucumber, and actually Cucumber wasn't particularly successful. It was well regarded. It won awards and stuff like that. It didn't get a great audience because it was very difficult. It's a very, very tough piece of work. It's actually about a gay man's fear of penetration, which means a gay man's fear of himself, which means his gay shame. It was a very risky series that only said what it was about after 8 hours, and its very last line. In his last line, it went bang. That's your frame. That's the perspective. That's where we are. Henry's coming to terms with being gay. He's never said that. I sometimes think it might have been a more successful series if he'd said it in episode 1. Why didn't I do that? But I thought it was obvious, actually. I did think it was obvious, and nonetheless, it is well regarded. And never mind how well regarded it is. It's true, and it's honest, and it's right. so I'm proud of it on those terms. It's that you might not like it, you might not like what the stories I told, you might not agree with it, but actually you can't deny that it's true. So yes, so that's kind of the direction I head in. I think I'd have a more successful career if things were a little bit shinier and happier in my stuff. And sometimes I need to fight with that. It's like, it was in the years and years, I had trouble getting made as commissioned. Not trouble, but it went through a good 6 months of not being commissioned because the original scripts were a lot tougher. They were even tougher, a lot tougher on that family, a lot tougher on every single character. Everyone was a bit more selfish. I mean, I believe this. Everyone was a little bit more out for themselves. And in fairness to the BBC, they kind of turned around and said, yeah, this is hard. And the drama itself is hard. The passage of time is hard. So can't you warm up the family in order for us to have something good to cling on to? And they were right. That was a brilliant note. That was like, you know, there's me getting my first drafts ready, but I'd been so focused on my idea of truth, honesty, that I'd forgotten to welcome people in. You've got to do that at the same time. Come and watch this, please. So you know, yes, there is that honesty, and you're asking about the critics. I mean, listen, I knew this way back in 1999. I knew it way back in 1990 when I first wrote my first character. When you put a gay character on screen, people will complain. Gay people will complain. Never mind straight people. Their arguments are just stupid and don't even need to be discussed. But I know full well gay people complain, partly because I'm that person as well. I sit and watch television, and a gay man walks in, and we're so starved of our own representation. And this is the case with lesbian characters, with trans characters now. We're so starved of representation that if the representation on screen isn't absolutely us, then we object. If the gay character walks in is a farmer and you're a teacher, you're like, no, that's not me. It's like, that's not the point. You know, straight people have got 2,000 years of experience ahead of us here. They're used to translating. They, you know, a straight man can sit there and a woman walks on the screen, and he can share her experiences. He's not sitting there going, that's a woman, that's not me. He can absolutely tune in straight away and recognize that any character is essentially going through what he would go through in those circumstances. Gay, because minorities, characters don't feel that. They have a bump and they find it much more difficult. And also, you can go with this layer after layer after layer of this conversation. Also, I invented in that conversation a gay teacher sitting at home not recognizing himself when a farmer comes in. But the truth is, you could have a gay teacher walk onto the screen who looks like him, acts like him, is exactly like him, and he wouldn't recognize himself. That's also the truth. It's hard to see yourself, and I have done that. I have done living representations of people cast with absolute accuracy. And I have sat and watched the real life person watching, going, "Oh, this is ridiculous." There was a real life Stuart. There was a real life Stuart in Queer as Folk, a man who acted exactly like him. And I sat and watched one episode going out with that man, and he sat there going, "Oh, I hate Stuart. Why have you written this? This is rubbish." And I swear to you, it was one of my finest pieces of work capturing that man on screen. So that was an interesting lesson that people just won't recognise themselves, and you have to realise that that. The gay arguments, people, you put a camp character on screen, people say, why are we always camp? If you don't put a camp character on screen, people go, that's not true. Except if you put them having sex, they say, why are we always having sex? If they're not having sex, people say, why are they not having sex? Why are they sexless? You cannot win. Because you can't win, that kind of makes it easy. Because you can't win, just go ahead and write whatever you want to write. And then the hard work then is making it honest and true and real and exciting and imaginative and watchable. That's true of any drama, but simply don't worry about it. It really, really, really doesn't matter. And it's a great question to ask, Audrey, because now I don't know if you feel the same. I would hate to be starting out now as a young writer with Twitter on the go, because I'm talking about when I was younger, growing up. An opinion, I don't know what, on Canal Street, in a pub, something my sister might say to me or something. Now you've got 100,000 voices swarming like bees, ready to tell you that you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And they especially attack women, and they especially attack writers of colour, especially. I mean, it's a white male environment, that place, and let's admit it. Why don't we admit that? And to be 18 or 21 starting out in your scripts now means I think you have to be made of steel. I think writers are made of steel. I don't want to put people off. I think no matter how insecure and whimsical and scared they can be, if they're writing, they are made of steel, because it's that tough an industry. You will have that spine. But my God, to be starting out now, that is hard.
And I'm absolutely 100% agree with you. And the landscape has changed so rapidly in the last 5 years. And for to prepare this interview, I rewatched some of your pilots, and I rewatched the pilot for Queer as Folk. And there is a line in it which always gets me. It's at the end of the pilot when Stuart goes to meet his newborn child. He's got this new baby with a lesbian, and he's just has sex with Nathan, and Vince is on their trail too. And he meets his child, and Vince, turns to him and said to him, "Oh," and he said to the, "You and the lesbian mother, you just had a child tonight. You both had a child." And when I was rewatching that, and I was like, wow. And because of course, Nathan is underage, and only by a year, but he's underage. And I mean, it's also now it would be like so tricky to write that line, and it's a great line. It's brilliant. It's funny. The build-up is perfect, and sometimes I really wonder about the censorship of our times. I don't know if I would have one, the genius to write that line, and two, the guts. You know what I mean?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you can, everything I just talked about, not caring what critics say, you can see it in my work. You can see moments where I'm just going, in your face, I don't care what you think. I think I'm still like that. And it's a tricky one, that, because it's very easy to be the white male here, because if television is more sensitive about dialogue now, there are reasons. It's like there are people who've been sat on and spat on for very good reasons that actually you should listen and say, don't make a joke about that. Very much so. But nonetheless, I think, I don't know if have you got a series over there called, have you seen I May Destroy You yet, by Michaela Cole? I mean, that's, to me, it's interesting. One of the producers on that sort of wrote to me, very complimentary, sort of said, I think of this as like the new Queer as Folk. And it's an extraordinary show that does, I've only seen up to episode 4, and episode 4 goes to places and says things that are just mind-blowing, and it's brilliant to watch television, breaking down doors and going to new rooms and new places, getting a new horizon in front of it. It's extraordinary to watch, and it's willful. It's kind of, episode 3 goes off on a little detour to Italy. Episode 3, you might do that in episode 10 or something. Episode 3 does it. It's so brave. It's not even being brave. It doesn't care about bravery. It's like it's Michaela Cole sitting there going, this is what I think, and I'm putting it on screen, and it's good. So it does happen. I mean, and I don't just mean that in terms of nudity or shock or sex, but the whole vibe of that show, the buzz of it, the energy, it's casting, it's determination to push into new places and to make them feel like places we should have been in years ago. It's really, really brilliant. So it can, I don't think, it's very easy to say television's a bit neutered and a bit censored now. I think no, in the end. I think no, you can still write whatever you want to write. I mean, imagine, tell what was hard, was pitching Years and Years. Imagine, I'm glad you enjoyed Years and Years. Imagine pitching it when it didn't exist. Imagine describing that idea to people. That was hard. It's not a one-line idea. It's a 20-line idea. And I like one-line ideas. As a viewer, I was trying to find a film on telly last night, searching for a good one-line idea that would make me happy. So Years and Years was tough, but it got through. It did get made. So, stick in there. It can get done.
No, and merci pour ça. Merci to open that trap. And to finish with, that career, and to talk about the boys, because what I found very interesting is that you were 18, when you were roughly 18 in 1981. It was, and you could think that maybe that would have been one of the first shows that you, instead of Queer as Folk, you would have written that show. But no, it took you almost 30 years. And are you happy with that? Are you happy that now you're the writer who can write that show, and with the the perspective, the craft, the background?
I wonder. It's fascinating. It's exactly what interests me about it. That you said exactly the right thing. Why didn't I write this first? These characters. It's just about 3 boys. It's a gang of 5 friends, really, in London, starting in 1981, and it's the decade in which AIDS appears. So it's their lives being lived as this increasing danger gets closer and closer towards them. And I was 18 in 1981. It literally fits my life. Their university years, their early career years are my life. I didn't have to think very hard about, I didn't have to do much research into what music we were listening to then, because I was there. I did it all, and I felt that stuff. So, yeah, I find it fascinating that I didn't write this first, and I think maybe it took me, I think it needed all this time, all these years for me to come around and look at something as devastating as the AIDS epidemic. I wonder what I would have written 20 years ago, 30 years ago, even now, and maybe it would have been better. When this was first mooted, and I went to write the first episode, it took me ages to write the first episode. Ages, and in some part of me was very, very resistant to it, and I think some part of my mind was, this terrible disaster came along, and I think I grieved for people we lost, and I supported the charities, and I marched on the marches, but nonetheless I do think I kind of turned my back on it and marched forward, not wanting my life to be about a deadly disease. Almost not wanting to admit the truth of this. There's a whole section in episode 2 of Boys that deals with the denial of the whole thing. I've never seen that talked about properly before, the extent to which we all went, I don't believe this is happening. I profoundly don't believe this is happening. There's a great sequence all about that. It's the best sequence in the whole thing, I think. So yes, I mean, I'm calling it denial. It was a very overt denial. I wasn't unaware of my denial. I was very clearly doing it. It just reached the time. So I think I am glad that I'm this sort of writer now. I think I'm glad I had the maturity to look at it. But I don't know. I'll always wonder what it would have been like if I'd written this in 1990. Wow, I wonder.
So I haven't seen anything, but music is usually very important in your shows. Were you listening to music from that period when you were writing? It's really, the joy of your shows is often, also associated with music. So I was wondering, what was the boy playlist?
Oh, it was all the 80s classics, and actually there's a lot of more commercial tracks in the episodes than I've ever used before. It's also got my lovely composer friend Murray Gold, who's worked with me on Queer as Folk and Doctor Who, and years and years he's scored all my shows. So he's scoring it as well. So I couldn't imagine working without him. I love him. The madman that he is, I love him. But yeah, there's an awful lot of 80s tracks there, and some great ones. I mean, I think we expect that. This isn't groundbreaking. I didn't invent the person who set a drama in the 80s and used 80s commercial tracks, but good commercial stuff. Because they're 21 years old, 22 years old. They're in the clubs, they're dancing. It's got that kind of energy to it. It's nice.
And the music that was called High Energy at the time, I think. I'm very much looking forward for that soundtrack, actually.
Yeah, we're very proud of it. It's funny, we've been working in lockdown, but we finished shooting, and it's amazing now in lockdown how much post-production can be done without a human hand touching things. We get the edits online, we've got the grading the picture. I'm going to Manchester next week because we're doing the final mixes for the sound, and they've worked out a way. They've got a safe studio that 3 of us can sit in, and so that'll be interesting. Human interaction at long last, because it's good to sit and watch that final mix together and to agree opinions on it. But yeah, it's all been done. It'll be finished soon. Very proud of it. Fingers crossed. But thank you very much. I've loved this. Thank you. You've been so kind, Audrey. Said such lovely things. I'm quite overwhelmed actually, and stop it. But thank you, and I'm sorry this couldn't be in person. In person next time. That'd be nice.
Merci.
Merci. Au revoir.